The act of lowering the body toward the ground and returning to an upright position is so familiar that it almost disappears from awareness. Yet within that ordinary motion lies a remarkable orchestration of biology. As the hips travel back and down, powerful muscles along the thighs and buttocks lengthen under tension, behaving like elastic bands that store potential energy while carefully controlling descent. The knees bend not as isolated hinges, but as participants in a coordinated chain, guided by ligaments that sense position and by cartilage that distributes pressure across curved joint surfaces. At the same moment, the spine subtly adjusts its curves to keep the head balanced over the feet, protecting delicate neural structures while allowing fluid motion. Nothing moves alone. Every segment negotiates with its neighbors to maintain both mobility and integrity. During the upward phase, those lengthened muscles reverse their role and contract, converting stored mechanical potential into upward drive against gravity. This contraction is not a simple on-off switch, but a finely graded signal sent from motor regions of the brain through the spinal cord into branching nerves that activate thousands of muscle fibers in shifting patterns. Some fibers fire strongly to generate force. Others stabilize to prevent unwanted rotation, and still others adjust moment by moment as weight subtly shifts across the soles of the feet. The feet themselves act as sensory organs as much as structural supports, packed with receptors that detect pressure and texture and relay that information back to the brain in fractions of a second. With each repetition, this feedback loop refines timing and coordination, teaching the nervous system to predict the body's path before the movement fully unfolds. Breathing weaves through the motion as an internal rhythm that supports structure from within. A gentle exhalation during the rise naturally engages deep abdominal muscles, increasing internal pressure around the spine and creating a supportive cylinder that reduces strain on the lower back. Blood vessels within the working muscles dilate to deliver oxygen and carry away metabolic byproducts, while the heart subtly increases output to match the growing demand. Even the bones participate in this exchange. Compressive forces traveling through the hips and legs stimulate bone-forming cells, encouraging the skeleton to renew and strengthen in response to use. In this way, a single controlled squat becomes a conversation between muscle, nerve, circulation, and bone, each adapting to the language of load. Balance during the movement is never static. Tiny shifts forward or backward are constantly detected and corrected by ankle muscles that make near-invisible adjustments, preventing collapse and guiding the center of mass along a safe path. Vision, inner ear signals, and joint position sense merge into a unified map of orientation, allowing the body to move confidently through space without conscious calculation. When the descent is slow and attentive, tissues experience time under tension that encourages cellular remodeling, aligning muscle fibers and connective strands along lines of useful stress. When the ascent is deliberate rather than rushed, the brain has time to refine motor patterns, strengthening neural pathways that make future movements smoother and more economical. Over weeks of practice, this repeated rise from imagined sitting begins to change how everyday life feels. Chairs become less of a test, stairs less of a negotiation, and the ground less of a distant place to avoid. Muscles once dormant regain their share of the workload, relieving smaller structures that had been compensating in silence. The body relearns the fundamental strategy of moving from the hips rather than collapsing into the knees, distributing forces through large, resilient tissues built for endurance. Each repetition is both an action in the present and a signal to the future, informing cells, circuits, and structures that strength and stability are still required, still valued, still being asked for in a world where gravity never pauses and the simple act of standing up remains one of the most meaningful expressions of human capability, an ongoing negotiation with weight, space, an intention that continues to teach the body how to rise again and again in quiet defiance of decline, inviting deeper awareness of posture, pressure, and poise as the motion carries on into the next breath and the next ascent. the next upward drive, the next subtle correction of balance and alignment within the living architecture of the legs and hips and spine as movement folds into movement and the body keeps learning how to stand from where it is toward where it is going through a continuous exchange between effort and ease that never truly settles into stillness and always prepares for the following shift of weight, the following moment of lift, the following return toward uprightness without ever quite arriving at a final end to the motion, only an ever-renewing beginning of the next rise. Stepping one foot forward and allowing the body to lower between two legs transforms a simple stride into a laboratory of balance. The moment weight transfers onto the front foot, the body leaves the comfort of symmetry and enters a controlled imbalance where intelligence must replace habit. The front hip accepts the majority of the load, and deep within the pelvis, small stabilizing muscles awaken to hold the joints centered as the thigh bone glides within its socket. These muscles are rarely noticed in daily thought, yet they work continuously to prevent collapse, guiding the knee to bend in a safe, forward path rather than drifting inward or outward. Around the ankle, tendons tighten like fine cables, adjusting tension with exquisite precision to keep the sole of the foot responsive to the ground. As the back leg extends, a gentle stretch travels across the front of the hip and thigh, reminding the body of ranges of motion often shortened by long hours of sitting. This lengthening is not passive. It creates a counterbalance that helps the torso remain tall instead of tipping forward. The spine floats above the pelvis, supported by layers of muscle that subtly rotate and stabilize to keep the chest open and the head level with the horizon. In this position, the body resembles a bridge suspended between two pillars, each leg playing a different role, yet contributing to the same unified structure. The front leg absorbs and controls force. The back leg refines alignment and direction, and the space between them becomes a corridor of coordinated tension. Lowering into the lunge teaches the nervous system how to decelerate. Rather than dropping into the bottom position, muscles along the front thigh lengthen under load, acting as biological brakes that smooth the descent. This eccentric control strengthens tissue at the microscopic level, encouraging muscle fibers and connective strands to organize themselves along the lines of real-world stress. The knee joint, often feared and misunderstood, benefits from this guided pressure as synovial fluid circulates and nourishes cartilage, supporting resilience through movement rather than through avoidance. Each controlled repetition becomes a message to the joint that motion can be safe, stable, and sustainable. Rising back up reverses the flow of forces. The front foot presses into the ground, and that pressure travels upward through the ankle, knee, and hip in a vertical wave of effort. The gluteal muscles contract with purpose, driving the body back toward center while preventing the pelvis from tilting or twisting. At the same time, the back leg assists just enough to share the task without stealing it, training cooperation rather than dominance between sides of the body. This asymmetrical work exposes differences in strength and coordination that symmetry often hides, offering an opportunity for quiet correction rather than judgment. Balance during the lunge is a conversation among the senses. The eyes track a steady point. The inner ear monitors head position, and receptors and muscles and joints report tiny changes in angle and pressure. When a slight wobble appears, corrective signals travel almost instantly from brain to muscle, refining posture before instability becomes visible. Over time, these rapid adjustments become more economical, reducing unnecessary tension and allowing movement to feel both grounded and fluid. Circulation responds as well. Alternating loading between legs acts like a pump, assisting blood return from the lower limbs and refreshing tissues with each repetition. There's also a psychological dimension to stepping forward under control. The act resembles moving into the unknown while maintaining composure, a physical metaphor for adaptability. Training one leg at a time builds confidence in moments when life does not distribute its demands evenly, when a misstep must be corrected or a sudden change in direction must be met without hesitation. Muscles, tendons, and nerves learn to share information more efficiently, weaving strength and balance into a single capability rather than separate traits. With patient practice, the lunge becomes less about lowering and rising and more about negotiating space with intention, teaching the body how to travel through imbalance without fear, how to convert uncertainty into organized effort, how to let one side lead while the other supports, how to feel the ground as both challenge and ally as motion continues forward and downward and upward again through a steady exchange of load and lift that keeps refining awareness, alignment, and trust in the living architecture of the hips and legs as each step prepares the next shift of weight and the next deliberate stride into space without ever settling into a final point of rest. Rising slowly onto the balls of the feet appears almost effortless from the outside, yet inside the lower leg, an intricate system awakens to manage the delicate relationship between height and stability. As the heels begin to lift, the ankle joint narrows its margin for error, demanding precise coordination from muscles that are designed less for brute force and more for continuous, responsive control. The calf muscles shorten and thicken, pulling through the Achilles tendon like a living cable that channels force into the heel bone. This tendon is not merely a connector, but an elastic reservoir, briefly storing energy and releasing it back into motion, allowing the body to feel lighter than its actual mass. Each gradual rise teaches this tissue to behave like a resilient spring rather than a brittle rope. Balance at this elevated position depends on microscopic shifts in pressure across the forefoot. The big toe becomes a quiet anchor, while the smaller toes spread and press, expanding the base of support in a subtle fan. Nerves embedded in the skin and joints sense these pressure patterns and transmit a constant stream of data upward, enabling the brain to refine posture in real time. Tiny muscles within the foot, often neglected, engage to shape the arch and prevent collapse, turning the sole into an adaptable platform that can conform to uneven ground. What feels like stillness is actually a dance of continuous corrections, measured in millimeters, yet decisive in effect. As the body ascends, the line of gravity shifts forward, asking the entire posterior chain to participate. Muscles behind the knee and along the back of the thigh contribute gentle tension to prevent the joint from locking rigidly. Around the hips and abdomen, stabilizers awaken to keep the pelvis level and the spine elongated, ensuring that the rise travels upward rather than forward. Breathing naturally slows and deepens, and with each calm exhale, the body organizes itself around a central axis of support. This internal alignment reduces wasted effort and allows the movement to feel both elevated and grounded at once. Holding the top position invites a different kind of strength, one measured in endurance and sensory clarity. Blood vessels within the working muscles open wider to meet metabolic demand, and the rhythmic contraction and relaxation act like a pump that assists circulation back toward the heart. This gentle vascular exercise supports tissue nourishment and can reduce the stagnation that accumulates from prolonged sitting. Meanwhile, bone tissue in the heel and lower leg experiences repeated, moderate loading that signals the need for maintenance and renewal, encouraging the skeleton to remain dense and responsive to use. Lowering the heels with control is as important as lifting them. During the descent, the calf muscles lengthen under tension, absorbing energy and protecting the ankle from abrupt impact. This eccentric phase strengthens connective tissue and improves the body's ability to handle sudden drops in terrain, such as stepping off a curb or navigating a slope. The nervous system learns to modulate force with finesse, blending strength and softness into a single continuous gesture. Each careful return to the ground refines the timing between muscle and tendon, making future steps more economical and reactive. Practiced regularly, this simple rise reshapes the relationship between the body and gravity. Walking begins to feel more elastic, as if each step borrows and returns energy through a living spring beneath the calf. The ankles grow steadier, better prepared for unexpected shifts in direction or surface. Confidence emerges not from height gained, but from control maintained at the edge of instability. The movement reveals that support is not found only in large, visible muscles, but in the quiet cooperation of small stabilizers, sensory pathways, and resilient connective tissues working together beneath awareness. In this upward reach through the feet, the body remembers how to negotiate the final interface with the earth, how to transmit intention through bone and tendon into the ground and receive guidance back through sensation and balance, how to become both lighter and more rooted at the same time as the heels lift and hover and the ankles refine their delicate dialogue with pressure and position, allowing each controlled rise and measured lowering to cultivate spring, steadiness, and circulation in a continuous exchange between effort and equilibrium that carries forward into every step taken across uncertain surfaces and shifting terrain without settling into an endpoint. Only an ongoing preparation for the next subtle lift against gravity and the next quiet return toward the ground. What we call standing still is, in truth, a continuous act of negotiation. Even in quiet posture, the body is never fixed. It sways, adjusts, and recalibrates in movements so small they rarely enter awareness. Muscles along the ankles, knees, and hips whisper instructions to one another, tightening here, softening there, redistributing weight across the feet in an ever-changing pattern. This constant activity is not a flaw in stability, but its very foundation. True balance is not the elimination of motion, but the intelligent management of it. A dynamic equilibrium sustained by countless microcorrections unfolding beneath conscious thought. At the center of this process lies prediction. Before the body visibly shifts, the nervous system has already begun to prepare for that shift. Signals travel from sensory receptors in the skin, joints, and inner ear to regions of the brain that build an internal model of where the body is and where it is about to go. Muscles then receive preemptive instructions, adjusting tension just ahead of need rather than in reaction to error. This anticipatory control allows movement to appear smooth instead of jerky, confident instead of hesitant. Each small success strengthens the accuracy of that internal model, refining the brain's map of the body in space. Training balance is therefore an education of timing more than force. When a person practices controlled leg movements, especially those that narrow the base of support or shift weight from side to side, the nervous system is invited to make and correct tiny mistakes. These errors are valuable. They provide data. With repetition, the interval between sensing a deviation and correcting it grows shorter, until correction begins to occur almost at the same moment as deviation. The body learns not only to respond, but to foresee, transforming instability from a threat into information. This refinement extends beyond the legs. The eyes contribute by offering a visual horizon against which motion is measured. The inner ear detects changes in head position and acceleration, adding a silent gyroscope to the system. Muscles of the neck and trunk coordinate to keep the head balanced atop the spine, ensuring that sensory input remains clear and reliable. In this way, balance is distributed intelligence, an orchestra without a single soloist. Each system listens and adjusts to the others, producing stability through cooperation rather than rigidity. Fatigue reveals how active this process truly is. When stabilizing muscles tire, the micro-movements grow larger and slower, and prediction becomes less precise. What once felt effortless begins to require attention. This is not merely weakness, but reduced communication speed between body and brain. Training restores that speed by reinforcing neural pathways and improving the endurance of the small muscles that perform the majority of postural work. As these tissues adapt, the amplitude of sway decreases and the smoothness of correction increases, allowing the body to remain upright with less conscious effort. There is a quiet elegance in this continual fine-tuning. Every moment of standing or stepping is a rehearsal for the unexpected, a preparation for surfaces that tilt, for forces that nudge, for changes that arrive without warning. By cultivating the ability to sense and correct the smallest deviations, the body becomes more capable of managing the largest ones. Strength and balance merge into a single capacity. The ability to remain oriented amid change, to let motion pass through without losing center, to trust that beneath apparent stillness, a living network of sensation and response is always adjusting, always anticipating, always guiding the next subtle shift of weight before it fully occurs, allowing posture to float on a sea of tiny movements that never truly stop and never quite settle into silence. To strengthen the legs is to quietly rewrite the story of the years ahead. Muscle is not only a tool for movement. It is an organ of communication that releases chemical signals influencing metabolism, inflammation, and even brain function. When the large muscles of the hips and thighs contract repeatedly, they draw glucose from the bloodstream, improving the body's ability to manage energy and reducing the burden on systems that regulate sugar and fat. This metabolic conversation extends far beyond the workout itself, shaping how cells respond to nutrients and stress long after the final repetition. In this way, each deliberate effort becomes a message sent throughout the body that vitality is still required, still possible. Bone listens closely to this message. Every step, squat, and rise onto the toes sends compressive waves through the skeleton, stimulating cells that build and maintain mineral density. Rather than wearing joints down, appropriately guided loading teaches them to renew. Cartilage receives nourishment through cycles of pressure and release, much like a sponge drawing in fresh fluid when squeezed and allowed to expand. Tendons and ligaments remodel their fibers along lines of useful force, becoming more resilient and better able to transmit power efficiently. What appears to be simple exercise is in fact a conversation with tissues that are constantly deciding whether to strengthen or surrender to disuse. There's also a profound neurological dimension to this renewal. Challenging the legs with controlled, varied movement stimulates networks in the brain responsible for coordination, spatial awareness, and executive function. New neural connections form as the brain refines the maps it uses to guide posture and motion. Blood flow to cognitive centers increases, carrying oxygen and nutrients that support attention and memory. Movement becomes a kind of thinking expressed through muscle, a way of sharpening perception by engaging the body. Over time, this embodied learning fosters confidence, not as bravado, but as quiet assurance in one's ability to respond to the environment. Independence grows from these intertwined adaptations. The capacity to rise from a chair without assistance, to climb stairs without gripping a rail, to walk across uneven ground without fear of falling is more than convenience. It is agency made visible. When the legs are strong and responsive, choices expand. A person can linger in a park, travel through a crowded station, or carry groceries home without negotiating every action against limitation. Fatigue arrives later and recedes faster, allowing daily tasks to feel like expressions of life rather than obstacles to endure. This functional freedom carries emotional weight, easing anxiety and inviting curiosity back into movement. Compassion for the body deepens through this practice. Progress is rarely dramatic in a single session. It accumulates through patient repetition and attentive rest. Muscles repair and grow stronger in the hours and days after effort, guided by sleep, nourishment, and gentle circulation. Respecting this rhythm prevents injury and builds trust between intention and capacity. Small, consistent challenges prove more transformative than rare heroic exertions, because adaptation favors signals that are clear, regular, and sustainable. The body answers kindness with resilience. Across months and years, these choices echo outward. Posture becomes more upright not through forced stiffness but through balanced support. Gait becomes more fluid as elastic tissues return stored energy with each step. Breathing synchronizes naturally with motion, reducing strain and inviting calm. The future, once imagined as a gradual narrowing of possibilities, opens instead as a landscape still navigable on one's own terms. Strength in the legs reveals itself as strength in living, a steady undercurrent that carries intention into action and action into experience, sustaining dignity and curiosity through the ordinary acts of standing, stepping, and rising that continue to weave freedom into the fabric of each day as the body keeps adapting, communicating, and renewing its capacity to meet gravity with grace and to move forward with quiet, enduring resolve.